Let's have a word of prayer. Thank you, Father, for today and your blessings. Thank you for your love for us and for your Son, for the congregation here, and for our shepherds. May we glorify and honor you in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. So up to this point, Samuel and Saul have had this relationship. And depending on how you read it, you could say, well, Saul, as king, was pretty stubborn and kind of headstrong and didn't listen very well and so forth and so on. Or you could look and say, Samuel just has not helped the situation. He's tended to be, I was rejected, therefore I'm upset about this. And this seems to be a character. So we read it different ways. And it does somewhat affect of how we see things. Is Saul really as bad as we tend to make him out to be? Because Saul does things that Samuel does. Samuel doesn't get condemned, but Saul gets criticized for doing it. So it's kind of an interesting struggle. But by the time we get to 1 Samuel 15, things have really changed. Well, this is the chapter that gets Saul into trouble with God, more so than any of the others. And so chapter 15, 1 Samuel 15, verse 1, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. Notice the emphasis, maybe the emphasis there. I'm the one the Lord sent to anoint you. And so there seems to be this little bit of a power struggle going on there. Samuel still wants to be in control, or at least it appears to be by reading it that way. And then he talks about the Amalekites and the situation that occurred during the days of Moses. He was to go and destroy them completely, wipe them out. Saul goes, attacks, he destroys them, but he keeps the king alive, he keeps sheep alive, and so that's just part of the story. It's we're not, whether he disobeyed the command as it was given to him. And so in verse 10, then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. So God had given the instructions to wipe the Amalekites out. Not doing that causes problems down the line. Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Now the question is, why was he angry? Why was he angry at Saul for not doing what he was asked to do? Or is he angry at God for changing his mind? If you think about it. Because who didn't want a king? Samuel. They've rejected me as their leader and asked for a king. Go back to chapter 7. So Samuel's upset. Don't know, it's not explained as to why. We kind of assume it relates to the disobedience on the part of Saul for not doing what he said, but is that part of it, or is there more to it? And that's kind of what we've been looking at here. So as the story goes on, he gets up, he goes to find Saul. He eventually, in verse 13, the Lord bless you, Saul speaking, the Lord bless you, I've carried out the Lord's instructions. Samuel says, well, what about all the sheep behind you? And Saul said, now this is where Saul gets himself in, I think, more trouble. And it's often the way we do tend to act at times. But he says, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best sheep and carried the sacrifice to the Lord your God. but we totally destroyed the rest. So he's going to blame somebody else. And I don't know whether, if we go back and read some of the previous chapters, that was an encouragement on the part of Saul, or whether that, or of Samuel, or whether that was just Saul's attitude toward things. But it appears that he assumes things. Saul assumes things. He assumes I can do this. He assumes I can do that. And here's the reason, and I'm going to give you good reason. But when we think of looking at ourselves, we can give all kinds of excuses, can't we? We can raise up all kinds of things. Well, yeah, but they said, or she said, or it's their fault. You know, it doesn't take long to figure out where all that started. You go back to the garden. Adam, why did you eat of the tree? Oh, the woman made me do it. You know, Eve, why did you? Oh, that snake over there. You know, and so we just passed the buck. And keep this in mind, because that's important in how David deals with things. So Saul is digging a hole for himself. Even if there's a conflict between Samuel and Saul as to who has the power or who's ruling the situation, Saul is digging a hole for himself. So he blames first the soldiers, then he blames the people, and we can see all that as you read through here. Verse 17, although you were once small in your own eyes, which goes back to when he was more humble, did you not become the head of all the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission. Now, that's kind of interesting. The Lord anointed you as king. That's true, he did. But how did this start? This conversation start? I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over Israel. So, again, is there a little bit of, God did it. You know, I'm going to step out of this situation now and just blame God. So, is he getting this idea from? Is Saul getting all these S's? Is Saul getting the idea from Samuel, or is Samuel getting the idea from Saul? I'm just going to blame somebody else. Because Samuel has been arguing throughout this whole thing, I want my power, or at least he appears to be, and so the struggle goes on. Now, again, reading down in verse 20, 1 Samuel 15:20, but I did obey the Lord, Saul said, and brought back sheep and the king and all that. So he again continues to kind of justify his actions. And I think Samuel does, in a sense, somewhat justify his actions. The most familiar verse of the text here, of course, is in 22. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice. To heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. And then Saul says to Samuel, I've sinned, I violated the Lord's command and your instruction. And again, so we go back and say, Saul's kind of catching on some of this. Here's what the Lord said, and here's the instructions you gave me. So, anyway, is Saul seeing this little conflict in this situation? Is he kind of saying, you gave me these instructions and now I'm in trouble, and what's going on here? So anyway, I'm just raising questions here, thinking about how do we do things? How do we live our lives sometimes when we're face to face with situations? And then we drop down here to God has rejected, verse 26, rejected rejected Saul. He's in verse 30, Saul says, I have sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. So Samuel went back with Saul. I don't know whether the idea of the Lord your God plays a role, not the Lord my God, or the Lord our God.
I was going to ask that.
Is there a point? It's used often as your God by people. We have to wonder what is Saul's relationship with God?
Yeah.
What has been his relationship throughout this whole process? And God has been pretty quiet in some of what's going on. So now this is happening. Now let me just say, Samuel is not criticized in any way by God, nor is well. Anyway.
I was going to say, you mentioned just now trying to relate this to our own lives, that when something happens, people tend to blame other people. But I find for myself, if something happens, my first thought is to blame or condemn myself for what it is,
Yeah.
But that's when I'm in a panic or in a tizzy. We're not supposed to get to that point, but I know I do. But once I can relax myself, God shows me the other side. It's not me. It's not what I'm thinking, I've done wrong or what's wrong with me. He lets me see through His grace and mercy. It's not about you condemning yourself. And that's a good feeling for me to know I was really blaming myself for things and God didn't.
Saul was more concerned about the men on earth than God in heaven.
Right. By this point.
Yes.
Whether that was the case throughout is another story.
I'm not so sure it wasn't.
And there may be a little bit. Again, it's how you're reading this. So, but the question I would ask then is, why hasn't Samuel interceded for Saul? And so
Because he didn't want Saul to begin with.
therein lies some of the
rough.
issue there. I don't know. I got another mark. I hit something somewhere along the way. Anyway, I hit things and I don't know where they come up. So I'm waving a black
Or
marker.
did somebody hit you, George?
I refuse to answer that grounds. That's not grounds like that didn't incriminate me. Anyway, so Samuel has not interceded. He wanted. This power thing was going on, and I think at least keep some of that in mind behind this. That even here, even though he goes with Saul to the people to worship the Lord, I'm not sure he's overly excited about that idea. And then after this event, Samuel and Saul apart, and that was the end of their relationship. So Samuel, I don't know whether he realized, I'm old and Saul's not. I guess I'm not going to change him, and he's gone off. Maybe there's guilt. We're not told, so there's some things we're reading into the text, but this struggle seems to be going on. So the power behind the throne here is apparently Samuel wants the power, or at least wants to control things, and Saul is kind of pushing against that. And when we look at this battle here with the Amalekites, this is the end for Saul as far as God is concerned, and this is the criticism that Saul will, at the end of their lives, the kings, God kind of sums up the situation. Well, he lived this type of life, but he had a problem here, and the Amalekites is Saul's big problem. So when it's summed up, because he disobeyed in the matter of the Amalekites, that's why things didn't work out for him. It's interesting to see some other ones. King Manasseh, since I'm reading through 2 Chronicles, King Manasseh was wicked, repented, tried to rebuild things. Judah is criticized for being unfaithful because of what Manasseh did, even though I think Manasseh, in his repentance, was okay. And then you go back and you think of Hezekiah, and there's a little interesting verse in 2 Chronicles right at the end of, near the end of his life, where it says God tested him and he was sick. He refused to repent or call on God, and then he repents. And this little blurb is the reason I didn't carry Judah off at this time is because Hezekiah repented. But it's because of Hezekiah's sin, Judah's going to be carried over. So it's, we blame Manasseh, but you go back one step and you realize, Hezekiah may have had a little situation there. So situations like that pop up here and there. But that's the end of the story that, as far as Samuel and Saul are concerned. So that's, we're not going to spend a lot of time in the rest of it. Chapter 16, Samuel anoints David, but they have no relationship. David goes off, becomes a soldier in Saul's army, Goliath, conquering the Philistines, different little things that happen throughout their lives. Saul's trying to kill David, jealousy there, and Saul wants the power. Now he wants the power, afraid of David, paranoid. He becomes very paranoid about everything. So when if David's not here, there's a problem. If David's here, there's a problem. If David marries my daughter, I'll have inside information. But no, the daughter says, I love David, don't care about dad. And just as an interesting side note for some of you, in chapter 9, this is Saul and his daughter. And in chapter 19, verse 14, when Saul sends the men to capture David, Michal said, he is ill, or Michelle, however you say her name. And it's interesting that, and this is a warning to all you dads, many of these guys are deceived by their daughters. Let's see, there's Laban, who's deceived by Leah and Rachel. There was the king of Jericho, who was deceived by Rahab. Pharaoh's daughter brought Moses into the house. And what's the other one here? And the witch at Endor is the only exception. She was deceived by Saul. So anyway. But anyway, so dads, y'all, if they have daughters, be careful.
Oh, George, shame on you.
Oh, I'm thinking of the two. I'm thinking of the two sitting back there.
Oh, these two are
Not saying anything that they don't know. Never told a single lie in my life.
Which is a lie.
Never.
Which is a lie.
Never.
Girl.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Chapter 30, Saul goes to the witch of Endor, asks for Samuel. Samuel comes up. The only one surprised in that whole group was the witch herself, because this has never happened before. Anyway, there's the discussion there, and Samuel's not a happy camper. Why are you waking me up? And basically says, tonight or tomorrow you'll be with me. So because you have rejected God, and let's see, did I should have marked that. Well, where's my, there it is. Ask for Samuel, let's see. Why did you disturb me? Verse 15 of chapter 28. I am in great distress. Philistines are fighting against me. God has departed from me. He probably should have realized that for a long time. And then 16, why do you consult me? Now that the Lord has departed from me, you become your enemy. The Lord has done what he predicted. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given to one of your neighbors, because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce anger against the Amalekites. So that's the criticism of Saul. So that's sort of the way that relationship ends. Yeah, so you can read it different ways. Sometimes our mood affects how we read. Sometimes our situations affect how we read Scripture. And we will read it one way and think, well, that sounds pretty good. And then hear something different or read it and look at it a little differently and say, I hadn't thought about it that way. And that might make more sense, or it makes sense. Or again, it's just the way we're set to read at the moment will affect how we understand the Scriptures. And so we may see things a little differently. And so the challenge here was to look at Samuel as maybe wanting more power than just being a nice around prophet who just kind of came along and said, Saul, you're doing the wrong thing. He kind of was battling Saul. And we see that in our own lives, or we see that in our own workplaces. How do we deal with people who are promoted above us, who are we thought we were going to get the promotion and they got the promotion. So how do you deal with that? Do you work behind the scenes to kind of undermine them? Do you say bad things about them, or do you pray for them, or do you go out and say, I'm going to give my best for you because now you're the boss and I'm going to accept that? And are we willing to accept that? And
All of the above.
all of the above. It's not easy because we're human. Because we want, we think we know some people have been where they've been for far too long and need to go, and other people we need to keep their experience. So there's even in that idea that you're an older person. Do you have this great experience? Well, now you cost us too much. Is that really the best way to look at things? Or hey, you got a young guy, he's got all this education, but no common sense. Hasn't got the experience. So it's just this big battle that goes on in everybody's life that we struggle with. And the realization is that sometimes there's people better than we are. I was reading the story, and I don't follow baseball that much, but it kind of saw a headline, got me a little interested. Whoever the Astros third baseman was that was sent to, I think, Boston,
Right.
he went to Boston and immediately took over third base. The guy that was playing third base was really good, but he was getting a little older. But he's still a good ball player, and I think they made him a designated hitter. And then they said, well, let's get him to second base. And then they got a guy in that was an outstanding second baseman. So that let that out. And the next thing you know, their first baseman got hurt. So they said to the guy who was making millions of dollars, we want you to play first base. And he said, no. What? You're not there to decide what you get to do. You're not the manager, you need the first baseman. But that's an attitude that we have, that sometimes there's people who are better than we are. And sometimes we have to do things we're not going to like. Play a position we're not familiar with or not as good at, or maybe we're getting a little, even the realization there's a limit to how much we can do. I refereed soccer, and I've told this before, in my 20s, running was no problem. In my 30s, jogging was no problem. In my 40s, walking wasn't a problem. And in my early 50s, before I stopped, standing in the center circle was the perfect place. But that didn't make people happy, but that's the way. So there are limitations, and the great American philosopher, Harry Callahan, from Dirty Harry, aka Clint Eastwood, said, man's got to know his limitations. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we just need to realize, like Samuel needs to know, okay, you need to be on God's side. And being on God's side means, let's help this guy. And he just doesn't appear to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to the next one, and we'll spend some time with David here in 2 Samuel chapter, well, we'll start in 10, but we'll go beyond that. David has been chased all over the countryside by Saul. He is then, Saul dies on Mount Gilboa in the battle there. David becomes king, a civil war, and then occurs, and then they bring both sides, the northern kingdom, or northern tribes, and Judah together, and David becomes king over all of them. He leads Israel in battle after battle. He's winning, he's picking up wives along the way. Sorry, I had to say it that way, but he's picking up wives and having sons and so forth and so on. And so things are going positively for David. When you read through from the 1 Samuel 16 until into 2 Samuel 10, David has this great relationship with God. Things are going well. He can pray and God answers. Things are happening, and should I do this or should I do that? And God says, go do this, you'll be successful. Go do that, you'll be successful. People come to David's aid. I think it's Abigail, if I remember right, whose husband Nabal was a scoundrel, and David was ready to wipe out the whole group, and she comes out there with food and said, no, and David's so appreciative that you stopped me from doing something, and so David was thankful for that. He wrote songs and all that, so we have a very positive picture of David in basically the first part of his life, probably about the first half. He's defeated the enemies and so forth. So things are going along well with David, and we look at a man after God's own heart. And then there's in the time kings go out to war. They go out in the spring. If you follow Ukraine, you notice that in the winter nobody fights because it's too cold. You can't go places. In the early spring, everything's melting, so you got mud. So there's a limited amount of time they go fight, and then they'll go out and fight for the summer and call it a day sometime in the fall. Anyway, and that's what they did in the ancient world. That's what they did in the American Indian. I was listening to the thing about custard this morning. Anyway, that's what the American Indian did. They would fight at certain times of the year, and then they would go, in the winter, they go to their winter grounds where they would rest, they would rebuild, they would refresh, they stay warm. The American Army, they didn't fight that way. They went out. It didn't matter what the weather was. It didn't matter if it was 80 degrees, 90 degrees, or 10 degrees. They were going, and they just kept after it, and it just ended the whole thing. So there's just different cultures that we have here. Well, here David is supposed to go out to battle against the Ammonites. They've been a problem. So in that's chapter 10. Chapter 11, in the spring, at the time when kings go out to war, David sent Joab out with his king's men and the whole Israelite army. Let me just say something about Joab. Joab is a strange character. He's a murderer. He's murdered 2 generals. But he is extremely loyal to David. I mean, he will do things for David nobody else would do. When David wanted to number the people, we don't need to do that. When there was something that had to be done, Joab got in there and did it to help David. The thing was, David didn't trust Joab, which is unique and interesting. He didn't trust Joab or his brother, because there's only one left, and so there was this little bit of tension in there, and David appears like he could not do anything to Joab, just nothing. He just He tried to replace him as general, didn't work. Joab killed two generals. And so he was afraid of Joab, but Joab was so loyal to David, wouldn't even lift a sword when and we haven't got to the rebellion, but when the rebellion occurred and Absalom died and David is mourning his son, Joab comes along and says, you need to stop this, get out there and be with the people who just want a victory. You know, and he wasn't afraid to talk to David. But he didn't rebel against David. He just stood with David the whole time. So it's an interesting little thing there. And so they go out to attack the Ammonites and besiege Rabbah. David remained in Jerusalem. And so, I'm reading my note there. So one evening, David, this is the spring of the year, got up from his bed and walked around the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to find out about her. And the man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanliness. She went home. She conceived. She said, I'm pregnant. Several things in here. Number one, Bathsheba is never condemned in this entire story. Number two, you notice who's following. We'll notice who's following the law, and it isn't David. It's Bathsheba doing what the law required for the monthly period, and so she is doing what she's doing. Number three, why is David on the roof at a time, and it appears evening, when Bathsheba's probably thinking nobody will see anything, and she probably has protection around. How many of us think about looking up and see if there's any high ground where somebody can see something? Probably never entered her mind. Not thinking that somebody would be looking over a wall at evening. You know, if you don't have street lights, it gets pretty dark out there, and I'm not going to be walking on my roof in the evening when I can't see anything.
Especially getting out of bed and doing it.
Yeah, that's right. And even though I don't have pine trees anymore, when we had the needles on the roof, that would even make it worse. But anyway, that's a side note. So here's Bathsheba. She's again, all this happens. It's probably unexpected of both. David seeing a woman and Bathsheba being in that situation where, even though she's doing what is required of the law, not thinking she would be seen. And so, and again, there is a debate among scholars: was she raped, or was this something else? And so you can take whatever way you want to go, but I lean toward the idea that, you know, hey, he's the king; he can do what he wants. And so this is where power gets into the power play here. There's some other interesting things about Bathsheba. Her husband is Elam. Elam is a member of David's bodyguard, or 30 power men, mighty men in the older texts. He is one of those. We don't know what happened to him because his name comes up, but we're not told whether he's alive or dead. Uriah is a Hittite, so Bathsheba is Jewish, and I'll explain that in a minute. But so she married a Hittite. No problem. I mean, you know, that's the way things were in that time. But she married her. She's probably in her early 20s, if not late teens. So he's out to war. Her father and so well. Let me follow this through here a little bit. Find my verses. 23:34. We go over there. All this is in 2 Samuel. Elam, we read in 34, Elam, son of however you say, Thinifol or Atha, the big A there, is there. Who's he? Well, we go back to chapter 16, and we find out in chapter 16, verse 20, or no, let's go back. Yeah, 20. Probably should have gone back further, but Absalom had rebelled against David, and he says to this fellow, "Give us your advice. What should we do?" And you could read the rest of that text as to what happens, but they think this guy has great advice. He's a Jew. He's Bathsheba's grandfather. And that helps explain why he was standing with Absalom and not David. He was not happy with what happened to David. And so what's going on with David then? Everybody thinks, David thinks, and I know we do this too, we think we can hide things. David thought he could hide everything. So he's asked a servant, and then he sends some more servants, and nobody knows. Come on, David. He's just not, this is where, thinking goes out the window. And then tries to hide it all. After the event, tries to hide it all. Calls Uriah back. He tries to get Uriah to go home. He doesn't do that. Sends him out with his own death note. He gives it to Joab. Joab sends him into battle. He dies. Joab probably said, wonder what he did to get David's ire up. And doesn't think any more of it. He doesn't have to. He's too busy fighting. It's when he gets back that Joab wasn't stupid. He figured it out. So David thinks he's hidden everything from all that's going on, and he hasn't. And this is sort of the idea of now, what's the power behind the throne? It's someone looking at himself and saying, I can do anything I want. I can do anything I want, and nobody will know. I can get away with it because I'm the king. And that's the battle that goes on here. So Uriah has died, and if you read through chapter 11, look for the words sent or go or send, things like that, because everybody's sending something to someone in this situation. And finally, they have the battle goes on, and okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was trying to, I mentioned this in another Bible study group, that in this whole saga with David and Bathsheba and all that, and you think how terrible, horrible, he was, and it was horrible. But it dawned on me when I read one particular verse, I had never thought about David this way before, in chapter 12, verse 24, then David comforted his wife Bathsheba. After she lost her baby, he comforted her. And all these years I was studying that particular stuff about David, and I think I've read this before, but it never dawned on me to see that side of him, that human side of him, that he would comfort his wife,
Well, we'll look at the contrast between Saul and David in a minute, but yeah, that's right. It's a good point. At the, let me see, where was I going here with this? So Uriah is brought to into the house, and for David his son, but the thing displeased the Lord. So things are, this is just not doing well here. And when David was a little angry that people died, he thought, well, Joab, why are you sending people? And then the messenger says, Uriah is dead. And David says, in the words of the Japanese, Gomen Nasai, or better known Doris Day, Que sera, sera. That's sort of that's the attitude. Who cares? Whatever. More modern word. Whatever. It happens. And So David has this attitude. The king, the rule, the power behind the throne has gotten to him, to where he has lost sight of who he was for 20 years or more. From his youth, he had lost sight of the Lord. Anyone that goes out and says to a giant, I come in the name of the Lord, you know, all of a sudden now it says, whatever. You know, that's kind of that's the temptation of power. And whatever's behind the throne. That goes with that. Nathan, in chapter 12, and David does not have a lot of the kings now did start, they have prophets, but their relationship with the prophets are more of, we're in trouble, get us out of it. And not in, let's work together. There may be some exceptions to that, but for the most part, when we read through these, they're just, the prophet was convenient to talk with God, but, you know, what am I going to do? I'll figure out something as a king. Because if they followed the prophet's advice, who a prophet was from God, they wouldn't have done a lot of the stuff they did, but they didn't do that. So Nathan comes, tells a story as if it was fact, which is interesting, about a visitor coming and a sheep who was more like a pet than anything, the lamb taken from the guy and fed to the visitor, and David gets angry and points he should pay fourfold, which came from Exodus. It was part of the law that would occur. And then Nathan says in verse 11 or verse 7, you are the man. You're the one who's the visitor who took the lamb, or you're the homeowner who took the lamb. And it's interesting as you read through here, the criticism or the complaint against David. So in verse 7, you are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms. Now it's not clear who that may be. It could have been one of Saul's wives. Anyway, that interesting. Okay, we're not trying to figure out the morality of all this. We're just looking at the reality of a time frame that is much different than ours, or at least it should be. I gave you all Israel and Judah, and if all of this had been too little, I would have given you even more. But in verse 9, why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. So David thought he got away with it. Didn't get away with anything. He took his wife. Everybody knew it. You killed Uriah. Maybe the only person that knew other than David would be Joab. But God knew. God knew what he did. He saw the heart of the matter. And so 10, now therefore the sword will never depart from your house because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. And then he goes on to say, out of your own household I am going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. That's chapter 16. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in the broad daylight before all Israel. Did it in secret. Not so secret, is it? And then David, now here's the difference. David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. No excuses. No, the people made me do it, or this or that. No, you gave me that woman thing, well, she shouldn't have been out there bathing in nude and when I was walking on the roof. I mean, we can come up with all kinds of crazy excuses. He doesn't do that. He said, "I've sinned against the Lord." So that's a positive for David, in my mind. That's a positive thing. And then David, Nathan responds, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. But because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die." And so there'll be a penalty there. Actually, 4 sons will end up dying in the process. But so here's David again repenting. We're going to talk more next week about David and this. I've taken away your sin. Maybe God took away his sin, but David struggled with that. And I think it's based on his relationship that he's had up to this moment with God. That David senses he's lost something and he's trying to get it back. And so we'll look at a psalm next week. Now, I'm not saying we're over, are we? Oh, we almost are. So,
It's time to close, class?
no,
Oh,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, for me, a lot of times, I take prayers that we're supposed to say for granted.
No.
Because when something happens, and then it's really, really something tremendous, then that comes to you, and it makes you pray. So I think about praying for those who have the rule over us, the power behind the throne. And I know we're told to pray for those who have the rule over us. And I take that for granted until something really, really happens involving our rulers. And that makes me do what God said to do, to pray for those who have
Right.
the rule over us, those behind the throne.
Yeah, power is very tempting and it's tempting not just in Washington. It's tempting in the family.
Yes.
And in other places. So, and I want to go to your point about the child. I always liked that. The Lord, David comforting Bathsheba, and the Lord be gracious to me about that. He comforted in verse 24 Bathsheba and gave birth to a son and named him Jedediah, or named him Solomon. It depends on how you read it. Solomon, but the prophet named him Jedediah, which means loved by God. And I was thought, okay, Solomon's got these 2 names, loved by God, and what does Solomon do? Well, he starts off well too, but he doesn't end up well. So there's that struggle going on. But anyway, loved by God. It's just an interesting way to see how this relationship came along. Saul was a good father. His sons died. His daughters, on the other hand, maybe had a little more issue with him. Samuel was a terrible father. Eli was a terrible father. And David would fit into that category as well. He was not a very good father. His sons rebelled again, did things. And we're not going to look at all the things they did, but one rapes a sister, one murders a son, one rebels against dad, had to be the same one, and then later on another son tries to get the throne in a sneaky way, and they all pay with their lives, and not very pleasant experience for a couple of them being killed in the way they died. Absalom hanging by his hair, swinging up back and forth, and guess who was there to throw the spears? Somebody named Joab. So it's a tough situation. But this is David. Looking at David, he's had positive relationship with God. All of a sudden, he blows it. And of all the things that David did, and all the problems David had, all the wives and everything, and the rebellion of the kids, this is the only thing that gets David at the end. The synopsis of his life. David was faithful in everything except the situation with Uriah. And what's interesting is Bathsheba is not mentioned by name in a lot of texts. It's just the wife of Uriah. I don't know whether that's God saying, I just want you to keep this in mind. Keep this, you know, this little tidbit in mind. Don't just say Bathsheba, say, right, wife of Uriah. Even Matthew does that. So I don't, anyway. Well, we're gonna stop there. Next week, we're gonna look at Psalm 51, if you wanna know where we're gonna be, and thank you very much.